So in this video, I'm going to show you how to set up Steamvr with Vive trackers and a controller. We're going to do a room setup, and then we're going to move into setting up the 3D VPRN and Live Link plugin. So for my setup, I'm going to be using one controller, which I will be using to do the Steamvr room setup, a version 2 tracker, which I'll be using to do the VP toolkit setup, one version 3 tracker that is already set up here with a base plate and a 15mm rod to go into my camera rig. This will be my on-camera tracker. So to start off, we're going to go and do a room setup. We're going to do room scale, and then we can hit next. So in my setup, I am using 2 version 1 base stations, and I am not using a headset. I am using what's called a Null driver. So I am basically telling the configuration of Steamvr that there is a headset there when there actually is not. I will have a link to a instructional sheet on how to do this. But I'll assume that you're all set up with your headset and everything now. So here you're going to want to put your headset inside of the tracking area or have it set up like I do with the Null driver. So when we do our setup here, we're going to want to think about where we want the 0 point of our stage. This is going to be the origin of our entire tracking. Forward of that origin would be most likely towards our screen. That would be positive X. So you're going to want to determine here how you want that to be, and then mark a spot on your ground as to where that is. I usually recommend making it as exact as possible. So the first part of this, we're going to be telling it where our forward axis is. What you would want to do is stand at that center point and then point directly towards where you want forward axis of your stage to be. If you're doing this with an LED wall system, most of the time you're going to be standing at the 0, looking directly at the center of the LED wall, and then pulling the trigger, trying to line that up as accurate as possible. In my setup, my 0 point is directly behind me. It's right here on the ground. So when I line it up, mine goes nearly towards this end of this wall here, because in my configuration, I use both sides of my wall. So the 0 point is the best spot for the tracking, not exactly the best spot for the orientation of my screens. So I'm going to hit next. So for this, you're going to want to put the tracker down on the 0 point that you've determined and labeled. I generally like to be clear out of the way of the tracking system when I hit calibrate floor. So next we're going to set some boundaries. I generally like to use this as another way to get another calibration point for my system. I'm going to make a basic outline of my room, but if I was going to do this on an LED wall system, I may actually measure multiple points, and then that way when I go to line up where my 0 point is, I have more frames of reference. So once I've set the boundaries as wide as I possibly can with whatever tracking setup I'm using, you can see my Vive base station placement here. This is because my general area where I'll be using my tracker is around where I sit, if you can see it here. If I would recommend, if you're going to be using this entire stage, that you put the trackers on the corners and then have them above the stage and then facing down. A lot of people like to use like 12x frames and then rig it to the corners. It will give you a pretty good coverage area, and then as long as you're not using tall props or having overhead lights, you generally don't get blocked. I found that this is one of the more reliable ways of using Vive, even on some mid-level commercial and film production stuff. So once we've set the boundaries, now I'm going to place my controller so that the center of this tracker here is down. I will be able to see the 0 point that I've created on the ground. When I place that on the ground, I try to get as lined up as possible with the forward axis of my stage, so that now when I move into the next process here, where I set my play area, this is actually where you determine the 0 point of your tracking. So now I'm going to use that tracker, or that so now I'm going to use that controller that's now live in virtual space as my way of calibrating the 0 point where I want it to be. So you get that lined up with the center of the box as possible. This is usually where it looks pretty good to me. I like to line it up with the arrow. And then we hit next. And then you can hit done. So now your Steamvr is calibrated to that 0 point and to that forward axis. You're going to download the two links that I have. You're going to download the VPRN FreeD OpenVR, and then you're going to download the FreeD LiveLink plugin for Unreal Engine, which will not be necessary in 4.27. So what you're going to want to do is copy the LiveLink FreeD plugin, and it will be in a folder like this. You're going to create a plugin folder in your project's base folder structure here, and then it will be plugins and then the FreeD plugin. You may also have a VP toolkit in there. So once you've got your folder structure set up, you're going to want to run the VP toolkit preset batch. So this is starting an OpenVR VPRN that can talk to the LiveLink setup based on the parameters in this batch file. So you should be able to see your different tracking coming through and your headset and anything that you have coming through Steamvr. So we are going to need to go right-click this and go to Edit. And then now, okay, so this batch file is going to determine some of the parameters that your VPRN run at. So first off, we have the port that the actual VPRN goes over. We'll get into that later. This is a reference transform. So if you add numbers into here, that will offset your entire calibration. So with my setup, this is my controller. So you can see here, you're going to want to, for you to set this up, you will want to take whatever number is here, your controller ID, and then replace this with it. That is going to now make this whole entire channel here take this tracking address and send it out as a virtual camera that can be picked up in the LiveLink plugin. Okay, so now we're going to want to go through each of these and change the tracker ID to whatever tracker ID you'd like to use for that purpose. If you have less of these, you can delete one of these. You just want to delete its entirety, like I usually start from up here and then delete that amount. But you can also just leave them. It doesn't really matter. They just won't pick up anything. So this is another offset. You can use this to offset your camera offset if you'd like, but I wouldn't recommend it. I generally keep these at 0 and then do all of my transforms or anything like that in Unreal Engine. But if you feel you need to offset something, you can do it there. So this is the IP address and the port that our LiveLink signal will be going over. In my workflow, I've found it easiest to run it to my local computer, and then anytime I'm using a remote node or a separate node in my system, another machine, I use the IP address of that machine, and then I use the local IP address to pick that up. So once you've added your tracking addresses that correspond with the trackers that you want to use here, you may have to move them around to figure out which is which. You may want to write this down or have a copy of it somewhere, but you can just place them in here, and this will align this IP and this port number with this tracking ID. You can see your raw tracking data coming through here, and then you see the space down here that says virtual space and then virtual cameras. What the virtual space is doing is the reference point is going to be the 0 point that we are getting directly from Steamvr. That is the one that we determined in our room setup. And then the actual position is going to be, because we're going to have to calibrate this system and now tell this what the 0 point is. So that's what I use this tracker for. And in doing this, I place the tracker on the ground with the light back in the back, and then line the light up with this calibration marker that I've added here. And then I can pretty much line that up with the forward axis, which in my room, that would be down here on the ground. And then I'm going to place that. Now, I have lines on the ground that line up with those points so that every time, this is for me for testing purposes, it doesn't take me very long to just place it on the ground. So now you can see that that is tracker 5 right here. Because you can see it's not very far off of its 0 point. It hasn't changed much in its axis. So if I have this highlighted here and I actually click the number 5, what that's going to do is it's going to set that tracker's location as the new 0 point for these virtual cameras. You can see this is how far off it was. This is the new position in relation to the reference, which is our 0 that we created in Steamvr. And then you can see all of the trackers in relation to that new 0 point. You can see the one that's on the ground is pretty much just at 0 because we just set it to be that. So that is now, so if you need to quickly calibrate your system and reset your 0 point, you can just put the tracker on the ground, the same tracker that you used before or another tracker, and then just hit the number and it will recalibrate your system. Sometimes this comes in handy, especially if you need to do quick offsets, where you want to offset the stage by a couple of meters or something like that, and you don't have time to do a full room setup. You can easily do that offset by bringing it back and then resetting your mesh position and the rest of your virtual stuff, in relation to that. Okay, so now that we've got that running, let's open up our Unreal Engine project. Now that we've got our project open that we're going to be setting up the live link in, we have to make sure that, just as a double check, that we've added the live link plugin folder to the plugins folder of the project. If you've opened that project and then put the plugin into it, you may have to restart the project, but then you will see in your plugins folder 3D live link. And then if you go to source down here and then you go to live link, so now it's going to ask you for an IP address, and it's going to ask you for a port number. The way that I like to run this whole system is I generally have the live link plugin just look on localhost or just open here, and then I determine which tracker it's receiving by subtly changing the port number. So if I change this to port 1, this should align with my controller here. And then if I add that, now that will add my controller. If this was yellow, that would mean that it had received the signal, but it is no longer active. If it doesn't show up at all, that means that something is wrong. You may have the wrong ID, or maybe your controller may not be on. It's just not receiving it at all. So now I'm going to add the other trackers here, 2 and 3. So now, so that we can recall this setup at any time, we're going to go to presets and then go to save as preset. So I generally like to keep a copy of the main preset that I use in my plugins folder, which is the VP Toolkit Concept Kit plugins folder. And then so that can come around with me as I go from project to project, so that I don't have to do this process again. I can just copy and paste. But I like to put the live link preset that I'm actually using in the content folder, because when you go to set the default live link preset for your project, its default is just game mode. So it's easier to just run it off of here, so that if that ever resets on you, it'll still work. So I'm going to save this one, and I'm going to name this nDisplay. So now that you've made that preset, you're going to want to go up to your project settings and go to the live link plugin, and then we're going to set that as our default live link preset. And what that's going to do is when nDisplay fires up, it's opening up an editor of the project and then going into play mode, and it's going to automatically have that preset that you've determined here once it fires up. And then if you did not put your preset in the game folder, you can tell it which folder it's in your project. But if you leave it default, it's just the content folder of your project. So once you've got the live link signal and you'd like to use this with a multi-node system, the easiest way that I've found to do this is I add the IP address of whatever machine I want to send the signal to that is going to be running nDisplay to a duplicate signal line here, and then I leave the port address the same. This will make it so that when these addresses here look for that signal on the local machine, the FreeD would have sent it directly to that machine, so now there is a signal on that machine to be picked up. If you'd like all of the signals to go to multiple machines, you will have to make a duplicate of this line here, the FreeD line, and then add the IP address of which other machine you'd like to send it to. And then this setup here should pick that up. So something that I wanted to add here, you want to check your manage Vive trackers, and if you go here, there are roles here. I generally keep these all disabled, and the results that I get with my tracking are pretty consistent. If you have these set to something else, you may get different accesses than however I'm setting up this system. So I'd recommend restarting your process and making sure that your roles are disabled. So something that I wanted to mention in your batch file here, if you look under the camera T1, which I use as my main camera tracker, there is a smoothing filter here. I don't know too much about how this is exactly working, but if you'd like to change the intensity of it, if you'd like to remove it, you can just select this and remove it. But if you'd like to play with the intensity of it, that is controlled here. So mine is set to 5 right off the bat, which some people have said is a little too much, but it may not be enough depending upon what you have. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you've liked this video, and check out vp-toolkit.com for more information and more videos.